lesson. I'm going to give it just about a minute or two to let people join, and then we'll get started. All right. Curious where people are coming from. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Love to know. We've got more than one country here, I'm pretty sure. Dallas, Mountain View, okay. Mountain View, of course, Nancy. Canada. All right, Portland. Yep. I was in Seattle, so like that area. Awesome, London. Okay, I'm in Portugal at the moment.
Hi, Harsha.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, thank you everybody for joining. Welcome to the lightning lesson. We've got a lot of value for you today, so I'm just gonna jump right in. Give me a second. So I'm Roshan. I've been building products for over 26 years, most recently leading a large organization at Google. And now I'm the founder of Amplify PM, where I help senior PMs grow into product leaders. And on Maven, I run a popular course where I teach people like you how to persuade, influence, and drive results. And it's in that spirit that I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest speaker, Nancy Chu. So Nancy is a former product leader at Meta and Roku, and she's coached hundreds of PMs on how to land senior product roles at top-tier companies. And I find her insights are both strategic and immediately practical, which, to be honest, is a rare combination. And one important thing that Nancy and I have in common is a deep belief in the power of narratives and persuasive storytelling. And both Nancy and I credit a lot of our career success to learning how to become persuasive storytellers. And so today, Nancy is going to share with all of you how powerful narratives can help you crush your PM interviews. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me, Roshan.
You're welcome.
And I agree completely. Storytelling is the one key skill that made my career what it is today. And if it wasn't for my mentor many, many years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, to point it out to me that this was a gap that I needed to work on, I would never have known that this was needed. And I'm just curious if this is the first time that we are meeting each other. Hi, my name is Nancy Chu. Put one in the comments to let me know that this is our first time meeting. But if we had already met before, put two in the comments. First time. So nice to meet you. Cool. And I'm just curious, are we all product managers in the room or are we also other roles? Put your role in the comments also. Yes, PM, product designer, TPMs, project manager, lesson instructor, product manager. Yes. Well, I'm super glad to be here, and the techniques that I'm about to share with you today are very helpful for product manager, but also communication techniques work across roles. I'm really happy to see that there are other builders, managers in this room. So let's get started. We're here to talk about crushing your interviews with powerful leadership narratives. And the one thing that I get asked all the time, because candidates don't get high quality feedback that they could actually action on after not making it through to the next round, is why is it that I didn't pass? I thought that the interviews went well and they couldn't give me any feedback. Well, from my perspective, it mostly is because the candidates, especially at the L6 level and above, so we're talking about principal level, GPMs, directors, and above, They don't advance because their answers are too operational versus strategic. And they're very literal in the framework. So, for example, STAR framework in a behavioral or leadership interview, or a very canned response to a product sense interview, right? So, if your answers are too literal in the frameworks, it's not going to sound unique, especially at a higher level. And also soft in conviction. What we see in leaders is strong conviction in their belief, whether it's right or wrong, that's a different topic. But being soft in conviction does not convey leadership, does not convey confidence, right? So these are the top three reasons why candidates don't advance. And based on the data that I have seen from my successful clients who have landed offers at the 700K TC, 1.1 million, 1.2 million, 1.4 million, just within the last 3 to 6 months, their stories are three moves ahead. Think about it as a chessboard. So they're not just talking about the steps in a very operational and tactical manner, right? They're strategizing and they're sharing the strategies with the hiring team. So three moves ahead, they're connecting the dots that other people omit. They bring in a very differentiated POV so they don't sound like everyone else. And as a result, that the hiring team can see that this person can raise the ceiling for the entire organization. In Amazon terms, this is called a bar raiser, right? So based on the data, these are the characteristics and the traits that will help you stand out. And the gap is not necessarily your technical skills, but a lot of times it's because how you signal your thinking is a little bit lacking and is buried in all the details in the stories. And that's what I want to talk about today. When you retell your stories in a chronological order, which the STAR framework or any of the equivalents make it so easy to do, right? You sound like a narrator and less of a leader because you're talking about, okay, here's the situation, here's the task, here's how I did it. Being a leader isn't necessarily about what you did, although the actions you have taken is very important, but that's not it. That's not the only purpose of the interview answer. What makes you unique at the leadership level or being different from everyone else is how you think. And so if you're not bringing your unique thinking and your unique perspective to the interviews, it's hard to stand out, especially when everyone is using AI to polish your answers. You need to be able to articulate what is it that you're thinking. And by default, if you're being yourself, your thinking is going to be unique because there's no one else like you. And a principle that I think is super important in terms of communication is that clear communication actually first starts with clear thinking. So when we are able to think more clearly, your communication by default, without you doing anything extra, is going to be more clear compared to everyone else. And especially true today because our world is moving faster than ever. Most people are too busy doing all the things to actually pause and think. And therefore, especially true today, your competitive advantage is going to be your thinking. If you just slow down and think more deeply, you will stand out. So, what makes you stand out is being the one who slows down enough to see the essence of the question. I'll give you an example. So, most people would have the same story if they were asked, tell me about the most innovative project that you have driven, or tell me about a project that you're the most proud of, or tell me about the most challenging project that you have worked on. These are three different questions, but most people will have the story that is the same for all three of them. But if you just slow down a little bit and actually think about the essence behind the words, what does innovation actually mean? Or what makes you proud? Or what makes a project difficult? These are three different things, and yet most candidates don't really spend the time to differentiate between the three of them. The ones who don't rush to the answer, they understand the essence of the question, the assumptions that the questions are asking beneath the words. These are the people who bring the insights and not just information. And if you were to think more deeply, you will stand out by default. the interview prep really isn't about trying to fit into a mold, even though it's so easy to feel this way. It's actually a journey to sharpen how you think because most people don't do this already on a day to day unless you already have a thinking habit. Maybe you are a journaler, maybe you reflect on your day to day already, then you're in the minority, but most people don't slow down enough to think. And so this interview journey is a perfect opportunity for you to sharpen your thinking. When you are a deep thinker, your communication automatically reflects the depth of your judgment without you doing anything extra. And when that happens, you stop trying to sound like everyone else who's also just using AI to polish their answers, but that's not enough. You will start sounding like a leader who is clear and strategic when you slow down and think more deeply. So you might ask, okay, well, how do I do that? In a previous Maven Lightning talk a few months ago, I shared these four techniques. So if you were here, you would be familiar, or if you follow my content, you would be familiar with some of them. But since most of you are new to me, happy to share these techniques with you also. I have nine, but we won't have time to go over everything today, but I'll just give you a quick overview. Number one is the BLUF technique. It stands for bottom line up front. This is where you start the answer with your unique perspective and not the S situation in the STAR framework. By starting with the BLUF, you immediately signal your seniority and your confidence because it takes a lot of courage to kind of break away from the traditional norm. Number two, highlight but not hiding the complexities in your problem because the signal that you are more senior comes from how complex your space is and not necessarily how large your scope is, even though that is a signal. But the reason why they would put an L6 and not an L3 or L4 in a project is mainly due to the complexity. So you want to highlight that and not skim past it. Number three, you want to shift away from operational language to strategic language so that you sound like a leader and not just a doer. Number four, every time you're making decisions or communicating the decisions that you have made, you want to anchor your decisions in the first principles. That way, they could see that these principles can carry over to them as well and not just an isolated incident. So, these are the four techniques that I've shared publicly in the past, and I have five more that I have not yet shared. Number five is 2x versus 10x thinking. This is very good when you're communicating your vision or the plan that you have created for your team. Most people only stay in the 2x category, but I always recommend that you also communicate what your plan is so that you could 10x the product or 10x the company. Number six is inputs versus outputs. This is very useful when the question is very ambiguous. You want to separate the inputs that you can control from the output that you cannot fully control. Number seven is assumptions busting. This is another one of my favorite techniques. The minute you start busting assumptions, immediately signals credibility. Number eight is baselining and contrast. This is very helpful when you're trying to communicate something really, really amazing that you have done in the past or something really, really difficult that you have done in the past. Without baselining, it's very hard for the interviewer to have the right context to know that something was so good or to know that something was so bad, right? This is the reason why sometimes blue actually looks black until you put black next to blue, then the blue will actually look blue. It's the same concept. Number nine is a 1, 2, 3 structuring technique. This helps you structure answers. For example, the most important thing to know is this. That's the one. The two is there are really two categories, or there are only two ways to look at the situation, A and B. And then the three in this structuring technique is the way to get there is through this sequence, 1, 2, and 3, or the way I would space out or create milestones is through A, B, and C. So the 1, 2, 3 structuring technique is very helpful and it instantly labels your story so that it's easier to follow. So now let's go deeper with my favorite technique, which is BLUF framework. If I can only pick one out of the 9 techniques, I would definitely pick BLUF. This is where you're leading your leading your bold insights before the S situation in the STAR framework. It instantly uplevels your stories. It instantly signals the seniority and confidence. For example, tell me about a time when you had to solve a very hard problem. Most people would start with S. Okay, let me tell you about this situation that we had, right? So let's go over version one. This is what most people's stories would look like. The S is there was this outage last month that prevented X. And the task was that we needed to do these things. And here's how I turned it around. That's the actions that I took. And then the R, it resulted in amazing impact, right? There's nothing wrong with this story, but it also sounds the same because everyone follows the same framework. That's why it's hard to stand it out in this format. And that's also why it's hard for the hiring team to actually give you actionable feedback because there's nothing wrong with the story. It's just very lukewarm. So let's take a look at version two. Here's the BLUF framework. As I reflect on all the tough problems in my career, I'm realizing that they were tough either because the path forward is unclear or the execution is nearly impossible. So here, notice that I used the either or framework, part of the 1, 2, 3 structuring technique, right? There's really two possibilities here, A and B. So in my experience, there's really two reasons why a project would seem difficult. It's either because the path forward is unclear, so I can't see, or I can see, but I know it's going to be so difficult. And to make a project the most difficult means that I experienced both in the same project, and that's what made this project the most difficult project I've worked on. So there was this outage that exposed really deep architecture problems that we ignored for 2 quarters, and fixing the bug actually wasn't super hard, but fixing the system around it was way harder. And then I'll go on and tell you more about it, right? So notice in version two, you automatically sound very different from everyone else. And in a short span of time, I'm already giving you a lot more seniority signals compared to version number one that was lukewarm. So that's the BLUF framework. Let's talk about the second technique, being using strategic language more so than operational language. I actually recommend 70% of your stories should be using strategic language and 30% in operational language. Most people probably have 95% operational language. So in version one, it sounds like this. I ran workshops on X and aligned Y teams to drive Project Z. Okay, this is operational language because it just talks about the actions that you have taken, which is exactly what the STAR framework is asking us to do. It's very operational. So how do we switch? It would sound something like this in V2. The core tension between my org and my partner org was revenue versus sentiment. And for historical reasons, revenue and sentiment never lined up, never laddered up together. They were always in opposite directions. And the way to solve for that is only if A, B, C conditions were true. Otherwise, it's impossible. And that's also why historically we had never worked on it. So in order to meet the ABC condition, we actually needed to reorganize ourselves first, right? And then I'll tell you about the workshops. I'll tell you about all the actions that I've taken. And in V2, this is an example of what strategic language sounds like. It's really just talking about the why behind it, right? And yet it's difficult for people to implement. So when you describe your tasks in a operational way, it's very easy to sound like a doer. But when you start to describe your thinking behind a task, it's a lot easier to sound like a leader. And it's a lot easier to stand out this way when everyone else is using very operational language. Let's talk about technique number 3, inputs versus outputs. A lot of people understand this concept, but not a lot of people actually use it to frame their stories. What does this mean? Outputs, as we know, they're lagging indicators, and the inputs are actually the things that we can control as leaders. And this type of framing is very useful when you're talking about something very ambiguous. For example, the prompt might be, how do you create a good culture? Well, culture is something that is very ambiguous, right? So culture is the output that is created in your organizational system. What are the inputs to the system? For example, it would be how decisions are made, what feedback, how feedback is given, and what behaviors get rewarded. So when you frame your interview answers in terms of inputs and outputs, automatically you sound like someone who has actual lived experiences and who actually thought about the inputs that would eventually lead to the output. Then you focus your attention to all the inputs that you can control and only talk about inputs, and it eventually is going to drive your culture. In this case, culture being the output. The fourth technique that I want to share with you today is baseline and contrast. It's hard for an outsider to understand your world in isolation. That's why blue can look black until you put actual black next to the blue. So there are two steps to this process. First is to establish the baseline, the normal way things worked, and then you want to contrast it with your world, why it was harder, why it was better, and why it was different. Without that baseline, your blue is going to sound black. Here's an example. The prompt is, tell me about your most successful project. In V1, it would sound something like this. Okay, I made X changes and was able to ship daily, and then it resulted in all the dollar signs. Right? There's nothing wrong with the story, but it's very lukewarm. So in version 2, let's add a baseline and let's add some contrast. Originally, we were set up to ship weekly. And so to drive XYZ strategy, we needed to re-architect our entire operating model, not the system, but we needed to re-architect the way we worked with each other. The entire operating model needed to change from A to B, which also included C, D, and E across all these other orgs. So then 2 months later, after I made some changes to C, D, and E that shifted from A to B, we were able to ship much faster, ship daily, and then it resulted in X, Y, and Z, and that made this project the most successful project in the history of the company. Right? So this is an example where adding some baselining and adding some contrasting will actually help support the evidence of whatever claim that you're trying to make. So this is very effective when you want to show and not tell. Showing anything is always going to be a lot more compelling than just telling. So showing how big the project is always going to be more compelling than just telling you how big this project was. So in summary, we just talked about 4 techniques: the BLUF framework, shifting from operational language to strategic language, inputs versus outputs, and baselining and contrasting. What makes you stand out is your thinking, is your judgment, is your leadership. It's not all the doing. That's not what makes you stand out. You're not just telling the stories about everything that you have done, but you're showing and not telling. You're showing how you think, you're showing how you lead, and then by doing that, you're raising the ceiling for the rest of the organization. The real gap in this whole journey on up-leveling your communication isn't the knowledge on communication techniques, because they're actually very easy to understand, right? Everyone understands inputs and outputs. Everyone understands, okay, you need to have a baseline first. It's just much harder to apply. So it's not that the knowledge is hard to get, it's just the application is way harder. What makes it hard to apply is the level of clarity, because it's not that you need to rewrite all of your stories. You just need to highlight the specific parts that are unique to you, that you need to just tweak by adding in these techniques to up-level your entire narrative. And it's that high degree of clarity that speeds up the application process. When you have a high degree of clarity, then you could take action. And that's the part that takes a long time for a lot of people. That's why it's always been my goal to shorten your time to offer, because the longer you spend interviewing and not getting offers, the larger your opportunity cost is. And so for L6 and above, if your TC is 500K or above, your opportunity cost is going to be around more than 10K a week. And the strategy to actually shorten it is to identify the gaps that are unique to you so that you can up level faster. If you need help or if you want to follow along for more advice like this, you can scan the QR code or find me on LinkedIn. Back to you, Roshan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. And please, everyone, scan the QR code. Nancy is spectacular at what she does. And I can tell already from the chat that people got a ton of value. So thank you, Nancy. And, having interviewed hundreds of PMs myself, I can say with confidence that the techniques you share, I mean, most of you all of you all I know have the experience and the knowledge. And just that storytelling, just that reframing takes you from someone who looks operational and tactical to someone who's strategic. Nancy, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
So you talked about how important narratives and storytelling are to landing a PM role.
Mhm.
But in your opinion, how important are these skills once you're actually in the role?
Even more important. And the good thing is that if you treat the interview process as a journey to really fine tune and just up level your communication skills, you're going to be training your muscles to do this, whether you're in the job or interviewing. So it's the perfect time to brush up and learn and apply these techniques so that you just take it with you on the job.
For sure. Awesome. Before we start Q&A, I'm going to leave you with a final thought. So you just learned how to crush your PM interviews with powerful narratives, but as Nancy confirmed, it doesn't end there, right? So once you land the job, now you have to excel at the job. And I can say the number one skill for a product leader, in my opinion, is that ability to influence and persuade at scale. It's an absolute must-have skill if you want to be a leader. If you want to go from crushing your PM interviews and then once you're on the job, crushing your overall PM career, then I recommend that you sign up for my Maven course. Maven is running a Black Friday sale at 25% off. It's only this week. And so you can scan the QR code here and I'll send the link as well. But in this class, I teach you a repeatable system that you can use to frame your message to be persuasive and compelling every time. And it's the same system I use at Google to secure multi-million dollar budgets, close Fortune 50 deals. I've taught this skill to PMs across the spectrum, and I'm so confident that I can transform the way you guys persuade that if you don't see results, I'll refund your tuition. So with that, let me open up the floor for questions. If you have questions for Nancy or me or both of us, just raise your hand in Zoom and we'll be happy to answer it. Okay, questions. I actually cannot see the hand raise. So actually, if you just want to unmute. Okay, Soumya, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there was a question put in the chat as well about when we say first principles, what exactly does that mean?
I can give you the first principle that we used in my previous role. So, principles are things that stay true with you from project to project. It doesn't matter what is it that you're working on, it just stays true. And the nature of a first principle can actually be very debatable. There's not necessarily an absolute right or wrong and that people tend to have opposing opinions, but you need to set a principle so that people stop debating every single time. The first principle that we used in my last role is that we would never jeopardize user sentiment for the benefit of growing revenue. Right? So that statement, it's not always black and white, right? So there's opposing forces all the time, but we just decided that that's going to be our principle and we're going to make decisions based on that principle going forward.
Great. Harsha, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, hi, Nancy, and hi, Roshan. Good to see you, Nancy, again. My question is, sometimes I kind of so when I'm asked a behavioral interview question, I sometimes freeze at the beginning, trying to recall the right incident or situation or something, which is the bottom up front. So what I've done is, I think from going from a previous session, is to build some story banks. Have it handy and ready, and then pick one of those from stories which matches the question and then the bottom line. I want your guidance on how to develop that out. So, as you said, right, when I get a question, I start thinking slowly, strategically, and then choose the right story, put the bottom line up front, and do all the details about the things, that guidance that you said. So yeah, so my question is about how to build those story banks and then make it subconsciously available so I can go with them. Did that make sense? Or yeah.
Yeah. Nancy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I recommend that you just all the not you specific, but in general, have maybe three hero stories, not five, not six, but three hero stories where you understand the details of the stories from all perspectives. And it's a lot easier to recall details if you limit the number of projects that you retrieve from cold storage, um, such that you understand all the different perspectives from yourself, from engineering, from design, from research, etc. And understanding how complex it was, what made it unique, and what made it special. So just three hero stories, but knowing the details from all perspectives. But what I want to say though, in the beginning of an interview, what you said, Harsha, is that you slow down and you try to recall from memory what had happened. I actually think that's step two and not step one. Step one is to make sure that you understand the question to get to the essence of the question, which we do in a product sense interview, right? So in the beginning of a product sense interview, we're not jumping to solution. We're really just trying to understand what the prompt is. So for example, if they're talking about a project that you're the most proud of, you actually need to understand what makes you proud. Is it the impact? Is it the difficulty? Is it because the team was not set up for success? What is it that led to you feeling proud, right? So that thinking is step number one. And then recalling memory is step number two.
Yeah, and one of the things I teach in my course on persuasive storytelling is a tool that I call just one thing. And so if your entire story fell apart, the interview's busy, the interview gets distracted, and they can literally only remember one takeaway from your story, what would that be? And that's exactly what Nancy is saying, which is
Yes.
sure, you're proud of a project, but why are you proud? And so I think when you come up with those stories and I don't, per Nancy's point, I don't think you need a lot of them. You can find actually story bank questions online to help you kind of pull that out of you. But yeah, really think about what that story conveys.
So when
Love
you're a
it.
hero, you're proud of what you did, right? So that's the bottom line here.
Well, the
That's
bottom line is what makes you proud. And that response is probably going to be different if you were asked about what was the most innovative project that you worked on.
Mm.
But what makes a project innovative is not necessarily the same as the thing that makes you proud. It could be the same, but is it always the same? Not necessarily.
I can ask a quick follow-up question. It's very quick. So the three hero stories guidance you gave, will that work for the Amazon leadership interview? Leadership principles, because they tend to ask 4 or 5 or even 6 leadership principles, right? So once I've got the feedback that I tend to repeat stories and situations, they wanted to, hear something else.
Well, I think it for specific to Amazon, it's okay that the projects in the stories are the same, but the angle is different.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Thank you both.
great. Kirti, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm in the AI ML space, and I think a lot of times when you at least these days, there's a lot of AI ML roles in product management. How do you avoid falling into the trap of like over indexing on talking about more of the AI part of your product work versus like core product management skills? Because I think sometimes I go into these interviews and I feel that they want to hear about your AI experience. So, and sometimes I fall into the trap of like focusing too much on that. So what is the best way to handle situations like that, where it's an actual, it's an AI ML role and they want to hear about your Gen AI experience, for example? Hope that makes
Well,
sense. Yeah.
yes, step number one is to get really clear on the essence of the question. And so in that 30-second to 1 minute, when you're just trying to figure out what the essence is, you would then discern whether this essence needs to be only AI or only ML or only technical signals, or it really isn't about technology, right? It depends on the essence that you're trying to convey in your story. And to Roshan's technique, it's that one thing that really answers this question. It could be technical, but that's not all that a PM does, right?
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. When doing these kind of these AI product management roles, how important is to be more quantitative, like talking about metrics versus just talking more about the work that you've done and products that you have built? Because I feel like sometimes you may over-index on talking too much about metrics, and you may lose the audience.
Well, I consider metrics as an adjective, right? They add color, but that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really well said. And what I'd say is the number one tip I give to people when they're preparing for interviews is put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter and of the hiring manager, because you have a limited time window to make a decision about someone. If you choose wrong, it's very damaging to your team, but you have a limited time. So ultimately, they're looking for signal and trust. And I love how Nancy put metrics are an adjective. I also love how you said, Kirti, about reading the room and watching the audience. And so see, what the interview, how the interviewer is responding. You can even ask, hey, like, did you get the signal you need? Are there any things that give you pause? But ultimately, it's about giving that hiring manager that signal in that compressed amount of time. Irfan, and by the way, we're happy to stay for Q&A. And so if people have questions, feel free to stay on. We're happy to answer them. Irfan, please.
Hey, Roshan. Hey, Nancy. Thank you. Lots of good points. I appreciate it. I had a slightly different sort of question, which is in situations where you have product sense and you're going through a product sense interview, or even for that matter, a behavioral one. How do you manage time? Are there tips and tricks or techniques where I think, Roshan, I just heard you mention reading the room. I'm like, okay, like I need to, but you're always, as you're sort of going through the flow, you're also trying to make sure that you're hitting the right points as you're trying to talk through a situation, or from a product sense interview, you're trying to figure out like, how do you create a solution? How do you prioritize? What segments you pick? What use cases you prioritize, and what the end results you're looking for, and how you measure success? And how do you manage time in these situations?
Nancy, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
So for product sense, the general rule of thumb, assuming that they are following the Meta and Google style of product sense interviews, is I allocate 2/3 of my time to the problem space and the remaining 1/3 to the solution space. So in a 45-minute interview, likely the product sense takes up at least 30 minutes. So that means 20 minutes in the problem space and 10 minutes in the solution space. That means at the 20-minute mark, I'm ready to solution. But I wouldn't solution before that. Unless, and there are companies that don't really follow this style, unless you get the signal that they just want you to get to solutioning faster, then you switch. But by default, that would be how I allocate my time.
Is there a specific reason why you would do that way? Sorry, just to understand. Is it more like you're trying to, from an interviewing point of view, you're trying to understand the thinking around how you approach a problem versus just rushing to a
Yes,
solution?
and because assuming this is a Meta and Google style product sense interview, the problem definition is a lot more important than solutioning. That's the signal that they want, especially in this day and age where building is no longer the bottleneck. The thinking
The
is.
barriers that come
And
down.
so
Yeah.
the problem space is most of the thinking, and the solution part is not a lot of thinking in
Yeah.
comparison.
I mean, 100%. So, in fact, the interviewees who didn't do well generally at Google interviews and with me are the ones who just jumped into the solution. Because if I can trust your thinking process, then I can trust you'll learn on the job. Because showing me a solution doesn't help because you're going to be faced with brand new problems, brand new domains. So that thinking is critical. You do have to manage your time and try to get to the solution, but not at the expense of that first part. Kunal, please.
And thanks, Nancy. This is a really insightful talk. I want to ask about the interview. And as you know, first impressions matter. I'm just curious, how do you, for senior leadership roles, how do you, and we all know like nowadays, the market has shifted and product leaders are forced, for lack of a better phrase, to be ICs and do more IC level work. How do you convey seniority in the Tell Me About You? And what is important? What are some of the signals that are important? Because I got some conflicting advice on what to say in a Tell Me About You. Like you have to convey things like highlighting cross-functional wins and sharing data-backed choices, illustrating deep user understanding, demonstrating end-to-end ownership. What do you focus on when you have a ton of experience, but you really want to crystallize and convey seniority?
Yeah. So I have a very, very spicy take on specifically on Tell Me About Yourself. And my spicy take is that the Tell Me About Yourself actually has nothing to do with everything that you mentioned. And that's because the Tell Me About Yourself is typically in the first minute of the interview, where you have the rest of the 30-minute time window, 45 time window to convey experience and competency. Everything you listed there is competency, but not character. And in a leadership profile, both competency and character are important. So I actually use the Tell Me About Yourself to convey character, and the remaining of the interview is reserved for competency. So how do you convey character really is telling them why you're excited to talk to them, why you want to join this company, why your personal mission ladders up to their company mission, or why you believe in them, right? So I make it more about them and how I could support them and less about my competency. And that's my spicy take.
Love it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm curious if people in the chat want to say whether they think that's spicy or if that resonates, because that honestly resonates strongly with me. There's nothing anyone has ever told me in that first minute or two that's made any difference because from a character standpoint, absolutely. But from a competency standpoint, that's the whole point of the interview. So Nancy's suggestion is excellent in terms of maximizing the benefit you get from that. Tell me about yourself. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people reacting that it's resonating. Yeah, Lakshmi, please go ahead.
Hey, thank you both for this insightful session. My question is, how long do you suggest the duration of the BLUF technique, or what is the good timing that keeps the attention open and Because there is 90 seconds, there is 2 minutes, there is so many such for staff framework. So what is the thing within this new framework?
So my principle is that I want the interview to feel like a two-way conversation instead of a monologue. It's not that I am lecturing, right? So in this session, yes, I provided a 20-minute lecture, but in an interview, I don't want it to be a lecture. And so I actually want this dialogue to be no longer than 1 minute of me just monologuing. And so I would actually create spaces for them to contribute to this conversation as well. So for me, it's 1 minute. But
Thank
it
you.
doesn't mean that in that 1 minute, I just answer the entire thing in 1 minute. I create segments. So for example, the BLUF itself probably takes 20 seconds. And then in the BLUF, I could say in my experience, I've experienced two types of difficult projects. One is when the path is super unclear where I can't see, and the other is I can see very clearly and I know it's going to be impossible to execute. There are two types of projects. I'm going to tell you about the time when I experienced two, but I could also tell you about the project that was the, type A, or I could tell you about the project that is type B. What would you prefer? Right? That's an example where I am inviting them to contribute to the conversation.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
That's great. Anybody else have questions? I don't see any more hands raised. Kirti, please go ahead.
Sorry, just last question. How after once an interview is completed, you've gone through the rounds. How important does thank you emails play? And being that you guys, both of you have interviewed candidates, how important are thank you emails where you're kind of just following up with the interviewer, just saying that you're thankful or grateful for the opportunity? And how much time do you give for a thank you email? Is it, do you do it right after the interview? You give it a few days? Just want to see like what the best practices are in those.
Yeah. So I actually kind of love that question because I will talk to I mean, I've done this for every role I've ever done, where I will ask the recruiter for the email address or the contact information for every interviewer. And if not, I will send the recruiter a thank you note to forward on. And it's one of those things where, at worst, you've spent a little bit of time saying thank you and it doesn't have an effect. But I personally find those little touches are, again, as Nancy had mentioned, like it's a display of character. And especially in leadership roles, especially in product roles, where so much of it is about people and relationships and your influence and your networks. I mean, that's your currency as a product manager. So I think it's very important. I think not a lot of people do it. I think it can make you stand out. I think it doesn't take as much time, given the potential return. That's my opinion on the thank yous.
I don't think that, to your point, Roshan, I don't think that thank you emails would change the interview outcome one way or the other, but it does help you stay top of mind. In the situation where they are dragging it on and interviewing 10, 20, 30 candidates for the same position, it's likely that they have forgotten about your candidacy, especially if you're candidate number one that they talk to, right? So in that situation, a thank you email serves as a top of mind reminder that, hey, I exist, don't forget about me. And so I typically, because the intention that I have is to stay top of mind, I would not send it immediately after. I send it few days after if I haven't heard anything. So that would be my perspective.
Great. Thank you both.
Okay, great. Let's take two more questions. Lakshmi, please go ahead.
Yeah, this one came because I saw this comment, how do you make it sound deep and not shallow? But I also had one more. Are these strategies be applicable for non-Meta, non-companies, or if the interviewer is focused on star network or star framework or something like that, and you kind of go on the other side, will it conflict?
So two answers here. What we're talking about here was actually never taught at Meta. It was never taught in these companies. These are just communication techniques that are not unique to product managers, not unique to Fang. So it just helps you communicate better. So they work across companies and across all roles. If you go on my LinkedIn, I had a post on Monday that talks about one of my clients landing 3 AI PM roles in 1 month, and none of them were Fang. So definitely do check out that post. Second part of that question is I am not advocating that we don't use the STAR framework. So none of the techniques would conflict with STAR. It just adds to the STAR so that you don't sound only operational. So the techniques would not replace STAR. They would complement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Irfan, we'll take the last question from you.
I'll just wrap it up here. So if you're in the job market like myself, we see so much information out there about PM job market, how it's changing, evolving, vibe coding, PM, whatever that is, like the job has changed. And some of the things that folks are writing about is like, yeah, in interviews now, you'll be asked to vibe code and sort of quickly, come up with a prototype that, that probably have, in a discussion. And how you talked about the operational versus the strategic sort of tone that you sort of drive in the conversation or interviews. Where do you see that sort of that evolution happen, and how much is that? Because there's so much chatter on the social media about their posts every day about like, here are the 15 tools you need to know and vibe code on and be comfortable with. I understand the pieces where it's useful, but like, what is your take on this, given you're in this space and you live it with other candidates as well?
I'll be honest, I am not as familiar with the new vibe coding interviews that are starting to pop up since I left Google a couple years ago. What I would say is ultimately, interviewers have a compressed amount of time to get as much signal as they can that someone is going to be successful at a company. And so if they're going to add vibe coding, either they're going to make the interviews longer, and they're already pretty long, or they're going to shorten it somewhere else. But ultimately, your job is to give that signal. So does that mean you need to know 15 tools because they're going to ask you about 15 tools? I don't generally think so. But I like to say you need to know who you're interviewing with. I would talk to the recruiter and ask, what are the things they typically ask? You generally need to know enough to be dangerous, enough to give signal that are aware of things that you can learn quickly. And it is a fast evolving, moving space. But what I would say is ultimately, they're still just looking for signal that you are someone who could succeed, learn quickly, learn the domain. And so even with all these tools, it can be overwhelming. But just focus on showing your competency, showing your ability to learn, showing the strategic thinking behind what you do, and not just I can operationally, tactically use these tools. Nancy, do you something to add as well?
Yeah, my perspective is yes, there is a lot of emphasis on prototyping these days, where you can vibe code anything. But we all know that prototyping is just one aspect of the PM job. The PM is not a prototyper, right? And so I wouldn't put all the time that I have to just prototyping, because that's not the job. But there's going to be an aspect of the job where it's going to be super helpful if you don't have to rely on designers to create something for you to get feedback, right? So that is valid. And it does make sense for the PM to understand how to vibe code, right? PM, the nature of the PM should be someone who likes to tinker. And so when we're tinkering with these 15 tools, ideally it shouldn't feel like, such a drag. I have to try all these tools. Ideally, for the right profile, it should feel like fun. Like I know Roshan likes to tinker. He thinks it's fun to set up automation and see what these new tools can do, right? That fits the PM profile. So hopefully you can make this exploration process really fun and get some signals so that you could talk about it live, just sharing your experiences. But that's not the only thing that a PM does.
Right. Yeah. There's a big discovery piece as well.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure. Well, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending, for your attention, for your engagement, for your questions. Thank you, Nancy, so much for sharing, honestly, amazing insights at a time when people are out in a tough market. And so your insights can be the difference between, going in there nervous and leaving there feeling very confident. So I appreciate
Thank you so much for having me.
and thank you, everyone. And I will send out the recording in the next day or two. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Bye.